Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casmon, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you are getting some great value from this show and it's helping you with your investing goals, let us hear about it and leave us some honest feedback with a rating and review. It helps us, but it also helps other listeners find this show so they can get the same great value that you're getting right now. And listen, if this is your first time listening or you just haven't done it yet, be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Nic DeAngelo. Now, Nic DeAngelo is known as the fixed income GOAT amongst real estate elite. Now, with a portfolio of over $206 million, he fuses economic foresight and real estate prowess for an exciting and value driven discussion for our audience. Now, he focuses on two foundational beliefs: one, Wall Street is broken; two, real estate is the cure. Now, he is the CEO and founder of Saint Investment Group, where he leads a veteran team acquiring institutional grade real estate assets nationwide. Let's welcome to the show, Nic DeAngelo.
John, great to be here. Great catching up with you a little bit beforehand. I'm excited to jump in with you today.
Yeah, man. Nic, great to have you on the show. We were kind of joking before we hit record. We actually tried to schedule this multiple times. I'm the one that had to reschedule multiple times. So I'm glad we're finally able to get this thing going. Nic, I went over your bio and background at a very, very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Sure. So I consider myself classically trained, blessed to be trained by people that have many years of experience. In my case, I was around people that had generational experience. So I started off, I knew I wanted to be near real estate as a very early career move. I worked for two family offices, small family offices, but that meant I got to work very closely with the CEO, kind of the key man, if you will, in those companies. I got to see how generational wealth was managed. I got to see the strategies and decisions that were being made at the highest level to manage not just a portfolio, but generational strategies, generational wealth, generational. So blessed to have seen that. I also made my bones on the acquisition side with those two groups. So they needed some innovation as it related to their strategies on that side. It was the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis. It was a great learning experience. I got to use some new school strategies, some technology, some data strategies along the way, and fuse that with some amazing multi-generational systems and tried and true practices that I stand on the shoulders of mentors, men that were incredibly important, incredibly influential to me. And then in 2015, we really branched out and started working with new investors. And since then, we have grown the portfolio to over 200 million in assets under management. The biggest change that we saw in the last handful of years were our most strategic, our most smart, our most forward-thinking investors looking for something different in the marketplace. They saw concerns, things like the Federal Reserve printing massive amounts of money, things like 2 trillion being added to the national debt every single year, things like inflationary long-term pressures that were changing the market. And they came to me, they came to us at Saint, and were asking for fixed income opportunities. So our flagship today, what we focus on day in and day out, is the Saint Income Fund that's based on single family mortgages. And the reason for that is that our investors were looking for something that paid out fixed returns for many, many years, AKA mortgages with 20, 30 years of fixed payments on the books, right? And based on an asset class that was extremely rock solid, which we found as single family residential. So that's where we're at today. That's kind of where we started. And I love real estate on a personal side. I geek out on economics on a personal side. And anything on that, I'm happy to cover or dive in for you.
Yeah, Nic, I love hearing about your background. You talked about a couple of things there that jumped out. One, you mentioned that you were fortunate to kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, working for these generational wealth family offices. Starting out from there, you're able to venture off, launch your own firm, working with clients who were looking for more stable solutions. They wanted something different, as you framed it up. You ultimately led to some fixed income assets, particularly with single family mortgages and being able to deliver that long-term, capital distribution to these investors. And that's kind of your focus. You do some other things investing wise. We can talk about economics here in a moment. I want to go back to a couple of things, right? When you talked about your upbringing in the industry, you mentioned folks focusing on the acquisition side, and then you started to really infuse more data and technology. This is back in 2008. Eventually, it sounds like you kind of make that transition around 2015 or so. Talk to me about that transition point, right? Because you're here, you're working with these family offices, you're learning about their approach, what they like, what they don't like, what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. And as you decide to kind of go off on your own, what was that process like? What were some of the things that you were focused on, and what was your vision on the at the outset of you launching Sane Investment?
So that's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever gotten that one. So that's an interesting thought experiment. What it was simply put, the acquisition side was where I could add the most value. These were operations, these were families that had these were businesses really that had systems set up, asset management was set up. They had plenty of money. The question is, what did they do with it in a turbulent, crazy market like the global financial crisis? That was the big question. So I was never salaried ever, right? I eventually was salaried as it relates to performance. There was a structure built in there, but I was always a hunter. I had to go earn my keep every single month, whether that was revamping some leasing systems on the back end or whether that was acquisitions. That was my job, was to add value to promote growth within those companies. So I had to put that hat on, and that's where I came. Today I still have the same skill set. So that's where I come from today looking at business. I lead the charge at Saint on growth. So the transition, to answer your question, from working directly with these family offices to working more on our own and transitioning into Saint, was that we went through a huge acquisition run with these family offices, particularly one. We really ramped up. At one point, we were buying up to 10 million a week. Okay. And that includes taking cashier's checks, walking to the courthouse steps, bidding on properties, trying to beat other people that are sitting there bidding against you. It's very tense, it's very intense, and there's a lot of risk. It's buyer beware. So our data science had to be through the roof. Our ability to run very complex acquisition models very quickly with huge amounts of due diligence had to be very streamlined. So that's really where I added the most value, and that's where I lean into. What happened was, we bought enough properties, we bought enough distressed assets, and they were doing great. The issue is we bought too much, which is a great problem. But eventually, what happened was I basically was writing a report, going through the whole process, buying the property, setting things up, and then kind of handing it off. And what ended up happening was the family offices were like, "Well, Nick, you know it the best. You know the game plan the best. You sold us on the game plan, adding the most value for this. Why don't you just implement the game plan as a partner?" So now I started on acquisitions, and now the second piece was asset management. So it had a natural progression, if you think of it that way. It went from one to the other, and frankly, it's the smart move. I would do the same thing if I had an all-star acquisitions guy that was kicking butt. I would just say, "Why don't you go do the plan, man?" Right? If you know what you're doing here and this is working out, go execute it. We'll give you the tools. And so that's how that relationship grew. The transition was that these groups are not permanent acquisition groups. They have a lot of considerations. They have big portfolio considerations, and they're not even 100% real estate. I'm a real estate dog. I will be doing real estate till the day I die forever. I'm hugely, hugely optimistic. I see the best opportunity in real estate, and it checks the most boxes that I'm looking for. So what ended up happening was they were waning interest because they were balancing portfolios, next generation, all kinds of things that were outside of my control, or really things that I wasn't involved in. So we started working with outside investors. We had some people that were more interested, and we continued to grow that side. From that piece, really our focus, our syndication focus, even today, what we focus on is industrial for syndications. The reason that we're not hot to trot on industrial as much today is industrial oftentimes has one tenant per building. So if you have 150,000 square feet, which we do, one in one building, and you have one tenant in that building, then if you lease that building below market or at a mistimed leasing situation, you have to deal with that for 5 years. Okay. So timing is very much of the essence. It's not like other asset classes like office or, God forbid, office or multifamily, which is great because you can buy at highs and lows in the market and adjust rents up and down with market conditions. Much more flexible, a lot of work on the leasing side, but much more flexible. So industrial was our barrel of the ball until our investors started saying, hey, we want an asset we want an investment opportunity that doesn't exist in the market today, which is a fixed income, something with a fixed rate of return, something that we can rely on that has a long track record, likely ahead, a lot of stability ahead, relatively safe, and that we could see the underlying assets as strong on their own. I did not see a better opportunity than single family. I still think it's one of the best asset classes in real estate, period. The issue with single family at our level, at your level, at anybody who's listening to this, it's really hard to scale because each house is its own tenant and your margins are slim on the total dollar figures. For a few $100s a month, you can't scale that for each deal. Property management, fees, team growth, that eats away at that. So what we found as a better opportunity for this amazing asset class was investing into the mortgages behind them. Those you can buy by the thousands if you have the money, the relationships, etc. We had a background in distressed asset purchases. So when you're buying 8 figures, a month, oftentimes from certain banks, they know that you're not full of crap. They know that you're a player. They know that you do work and that you're going to be back. And you can get calls. You can get people on the phone that are very different than someone else that they don't have the relationship with. So buying distressed mortgages, AKA mortgages at a discount, where all you needed to do was get their payments back on track. The only thing that took was leaning into the relationships on our side and scaling that up quite a bit. So that's kind of what brought us to today. We consider ourselves best in class at fixed income, and it's real estate backed. So with the stock market's up or the stock market's down, that doesn't affect us really much at all, right? And it gives our investors diversification and insulation against things like market conditions the Fed raises or lowers rates, or inflation we're a good hedge against inflation. It has a lot of benefits that the average investor with the average portfolio can carve this out. Instead of getting 4% at their bank, they could work with us, get up to 14%. So we're very proud of where we're at. And that's a little bit about the process that went into it.
Nic, there's a lot of meat that you just laid on the table, man, that we could dive into. To recap some of it, though, for you, that inflection point was you were working with these family offices to find these deals, focusing on acquisition. They were looking at like, you're the one that invested all the work to figure out which deals are the right ones. Why don't you actually implement the plan? You put together the plan, go run the play. But they were also interested in other things. Real estate wasn't the only investment they were looking at. So as you were going through that process, you started to partner with others and you started to get some feedback that said, hey, you know what? We want to look at something that's more fixed. We want more fixed income. You looked at single family houses and said, okay, well, this is probably one of the simpler things that we can invest in. However, it's hard to scale. That's what made you turn to the mortgage side of it. So today you focus on kind of those single family resident mortgages and really create investment opportunities for your partners there. you know, uh, I know there's different terminology, right? Some of our listeners may not be as familiar, but is this considered note investing? And is this first position, second position? Can you just give us a little more context of, what this is if somebody wanted to go out there and learn a little bit more about the strategy?
Absolutely. So I keep it high level because some of it's really inside baseball, but you're throwing around terms like you have a very good understanding of the space. So I'll drill down a couple layers. This is considered more note investing, right? This is non-performing notes, if you want to look at it that way. NPLs, NPNs, non-performing, underperforming, semi-performing. We play in that space. So we're not willing to pay full top dollar for the pristine, perfect sterling mortgages. We're looking for mortgages that are middle class neighborhoods, owner occupied, decent FICO. So it's like, well, what happened? Why aren't they considered pristine mortgages? Well, maybe they have a rolling balance from COVID, right? Maybe they missed 6 months because they got furloughed, something along those lines. I'll work with those individuals all day long to keep those families in their homes, because not only do we get to feel good about that, which is rare in the distressed asset space. Some days you don't always love the outcome of some of the purchases. I really love the outcome of keeping families in their homes and avoiding foreclosure. I really like that. Not only that, our investors get a very competitive rate of return, right? I mean, we go up to 14%. I'm really brag about that because I'm really proud of that, right? We get to keep families in their home, pay a higher rate of return. And at the end of the day, the process is a benefit even to the banks. Because if you understand the banking model, which I did, I worked at a bank for a year and a half, very low level, but just enough to understand the basics. Banking, especially for mortgage banking, is based on originating loans, right? You want to create loans. You get your fees up front. The first several years, you have the most interest payments for that amortization schedule. So by the time a mortgage wouldn't perform, you want to get rid of that anyway. So these big banks, or even mid-sized banks, even community banks, they want to get rid of these mortgages because they clog up their books. The Federal Reserve's on them. The Comptroller of Currencies is on them. The regulators are on them to clean their books since 2008. So I love that win-win. Homeowners, our investors, and the banks even want to take our call. So all that to be said, this is note investing. We don't package it that way as much. We just keep it referred to as mortgages and single family because it's more widely understood that way. But we operate in that space. We really, really like that industry.
Yeah, I love it, man. There's a lot to like, and that's one that has always intrigued me. And what you're talking about is a couple things. One, it's you call it owning the note, paper investing, whatever. But by focusing on the mortgage, you can scale up. You can buy, like you said, thousands at a time. You have a lot more control. And your specific strategy, you're talking about non-performing notes with owner occupants. These are people who live in these homes. They want to stay, right? They want to pay the mortgage, but they may need a little relief based on the current terms. That's where you can kind of come in and create a win-win situation for yourself and that owner occupant versus, just working with investors who maybe don't have as much incentive to stay in that home. So love that strategy. There's certainly more information that they can get on that, and we'll make sure we put your information in the show notes as well if they want to learn a little bit more about note investing, kind of your strategy on investing in the mortgages. One thing that stands out to me is, this is one of those things that I think people aren't familiar with, that they could even do this. Obviously, you've been working with family offices and high net worth investors. Our listeners are probably thinking, man, I'd love to be at a scale to do what Nic is doing. Let's just start with the mortgage side of it. If you wanted to get started in this business and maybe you don't have 7 or 8 figures to go out there and start buying notes, what's a more practical way to get started for your typical investor today?
Great question. I'm a huge fan of the entrepreneur mindset of getting started, rolling up your sleeves. There's one decision that an investor must make before all other decisions. Okay. The first decision is, do they want to be the operator or do they want to be the investor? And you can be both, but usually you have to pick a path. Historically in real estate, and you know this, John, historically in real estate, the incentive was if you do it yourself, you have higher returns. That's how it used to be in real estate. I would argue I don't see that as much today, because those that are buying at scale, those that are buying bigger deals, whether it's multifamily or industrial or mortgage portfolios, have better returns because they have higher margins because they're buying at a dollar figure less people can afford. So it used to be that if you do it yourself, you're going to have higher returns. I don't see that as commonly in the market today. But the first decision is, do you want to do it yourself or do you want to invest with someone else? If you choose to do it yourself, which is kind of more the vibe of the question that you're asking, it's start with a note you can afford. So We primarily buy senior liens, first position mortgages, primarily. I'm very comfortable with junior liens. There are strategies and advantages to buying seconds. Most people don't understand. They think it's more risky. I don't always agree with that. As a matter of fact, the majority of the time, I don't agree with that if you know what you're doing. So I would say if somebody wanted to be the operator and not just a passive investor, and they wanted to roll up their sleeves and do the work, the first thing to do is buy a mortgage that you can roll up your sleeves on and get work done. Okay. That's probably going to be, I mean, you can buy mortgages for as cheap as 10, 15,000 bucks, but you might get what you pay for accidentally, right? Many of our mortgages are hundreds of thousands. We're looking at usually often 200,000 plus per purchase of each mortgage, right? So I would say get started. People can Google around. There's probably, there's marketplaces. We don't deal with any of that because by the time it hits a marketplace, it's been, 3 or 4 people have been in the middle. There's all these upcharges, there's fees along the way, but they do exist. They have a high turnover. A lot of those get not shut down, but a lot of those just find there's no money in it by the time that everybody adds their fees. But I would say start and just buy your first mortgage. Put in 10, 15, 20 grand, buy a mortgage that you feel comfortable with, try to Google some underwriting. And you know what? We're actually having a mortgage investing masterclass that we're hosting pretty soon. So it's really a non-pitch. We're really breaking down our process for things. If someone wanted to take a look at that, they could check out our website to find it. And we walk through the exact process of how to do that. But step one, buy your own mortgage, make your own mistakes, do all the Google searches, buy some books on the topic, and really, really get going. The first layer of the layer cake is very slim pickings. This is a mid-tier and high-tier business. And I will say that not all of real estate's like that. There are BRRRR strategies for single family houses in different markets or duplexes that institutions won't touch because they actually don't have time for the small scale of that. But the individual investor can make a lot of money. Mortgages are actually typically the opposite. There's only real serious returns at the mid to high tiers of that. But if somebody wanted to be an operator, they should start with one mortgage, scale from there, try to get good returns, see what the next mortgage looks like, and get used to the underwriting, acquisitions, negotiation, and asset management. From there, they'll figure out if it's good for them.
Nic, I love it. And we'll definitely make sure we link to your website, saneinvestment.com/resources. You've got a ton of resources available that folks can check out. So we'll put a link to that in our show notes. And I love the way you described it, right? When you think about the mortgages, you've got to decide whether or not you want to be the operator or the investor. Do you just want to return on your capital, or do you want to be the person that's making the decisions and driving the business there? And that's a key thing because I think sometimes people don't separate the two when you can. Like many people just assume you've got to do it all. No, that's not the case. There are plenty of folks that you can invest with and just put your money to work. If you want to learn first and then maybe get a feel for what it is and how decisions are made, and then ultimately become the operator, that's a strategy a lot of people employ. But it's really up to you to figure out how you want to invest and how much work you want to put into this. So great insights there. Let's talk about the economy, man, because one of the things that I love is, you talked about your background and experience looking at data and technology and really understanding the economics of things as we're recording this very early in 2025. Tell me a little bit more about what you see as far as the outlook for the remainder of the year.
So I'll tell you why we even spent time on the economy, because this is a major passion of ours at Saint. Quick story. I was on the acquisition side. I was finding smoking deals, 50+% off of market values. Insane. I found a great one that was just too good to be true. We purchased the deal. And I was using all the methods that were multi-generational. These guys taught me what they did for their underwriting, et cetera. I went through, bought this amazingly priced deal. Okay. Values might be a different term. We bought a great priced deal. What we learned was the local economy was going through a huge problem period. They were sliding backwards dramatically. The violence and gang activity and all kinds of things were going through the roof. The population was declining. Local businesses were leaving. These were obvious things after the fact. But when you're looking at a deal that's 60% off, you really justify a lot of that you go, what's real? How important is that really? We could always sell for a 30% discount and make a ton of money. There's things that you do to justify that. What we learned was that the economics, the underlying economics, our data approach to the local economics, wider economics, state, county, countrywide economics needed to be included in our underwriting. I mean, this was, I don't know, 15 years ago, 15 years ago. So quite a while ago, and we've gotten much more advanced since then. So what I'm looking at today, to answer your question directly, John, and where we base all of our decisions of our investments today are in a few areas. One is the Federal Reserve, right? Don't fight the Fed. They have proven, especially over the last 5 to 8 years, especially, that the decisions that they make are lockstep with the success of the market. That if you're on the wrong side of that, you're going to have problems. But the Federal Reserve is complicated because what they say is often not what they do. Very often not what they do. That's one. Two, the general market in, across the economy, what we're seeing, nationwide as kind of the different drivers, and then kind of the different asset classes in commercial real estate. At the Federal Reserve level, we'll start there. What are they doing with rates? That's the number one question I get asked for 2025. Let's just talk about what they said they were going to do. Okay. And then we'll talk about what we actually see and what we think on that side. If you recall, 2024, there were supposed to be huge rate cuts. There were supposed to be many rate cuts. And then they shifted, saying we're going to do no rate cuts. At one point, Wall Street had built in to the numbers of the stock market 6 rate cuts. Okay. We were lucky to get what we got last year. I think we got a total of 100 basis point reduction over 2024. They were saying this next year, 2025, this year, that we were going to have another 100 basis points. At the end of 2024, they've already revised that in half, back to 50 basis points, half a percentage point. The market got upset, stocks were reacted negatively, blah, blah, blah. What we've seen is really since the Janet Yellen era, when she screamed at the top of her lungs, inflation is transitory. And then 18 months later, inflation hit 9.1%, most we'd seen in 4+ decades. And then we started the steepest rate increase in history in the United States. What we learned is that the Fed can't be trusted because they just don't understand their own numbers. So what do I actually think will happen with rates in 2025? I think we'll be relatively stagnant. Okay. I think, if anything, the discussion will be shifting over the course of the year to, do we need rate hikes? Why? Because I think inflation is way more out of control and the drivers are way more powerful than they've been giving credit for or been understanding at a high level, just like 2021, 2022, et cetera. That's the economy, that's the Federal Reserve and rates. That's what we expect. The most recent note here is the jobs report came back very bad. So it puts the Federal Reserve, it puts rates and decisions on rates in a weird place. They dropped rates multiple times last year. Effective rates for us, anyone listening to this, you and I, effective rates for us for mortgages didn't even go down. So they pulled a lever and nothing happened. That's their first course of action, because the 10-year Treasury didn't respond how they expected it was going to. And then the bad jobs report, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place because they want to lower rates to stimulate the economy, right? But on the other side, anyways, then on the other side, they have high inflation. On the other side, they have bad jobs reports. Everything is conflicting data. They have some tough decisions to make. I believe where they shake out is getting inflation under control, which is the long-term fix to all of these problems. So that's that. As far as the economy goes, go ahead, John.
No, I just I love the conversation because there's so much richness, and I agree with a lot of your points. I mean, just I'm very similar thinking of, hey, looking at everything. I think it's going to be very similar to where we're at when it's all said and done. But what I wanted to say was, as you're talking about the economy, I know for a lot of people who don't study economics and aren't really necessarily deep into the financial world, like, it can become somewhat heady or difficult to really make sense of, like, all the reports of what the Fed is saying. Is there a way or a path that you use, or when you're trying to teach somebody who's maybe not familiar in this space, just to maybe cut through some of the noise and like find the data points that really matter or figure out what to actually pay attention to learn?
Absolutely. The simplest way to gauge the Federal Reserve and rates, right? How is the Federal Reserve doing at their job? They have what's called a dual mandate. That means there's only two real goals the Federal Reserve is trying to achieve. One is inflation, two is unemployment. That's it. So all the huge large-winded conversation I had earlier is really only those 2 points. Inflation, their mandate is sub 2%. So as they increase above 2%, they are doing worse at their job by definition. Their second mandate is unemployment. The target's typically below 4%. Okay. So those are two things. Oftentimes they're conflicting. Not most commonly. Most commonly, they can put those somewhat on a path to kind of achieve both at the same time. We saw that a handful of years ago. That was very easy to achieve for a number of reasons. But today, when you have high inflation, which is on the way up, ticking up month after month, I think most recent was, I don't want to miss this but I think 2.6, 2.7 ticking up. So they're already above. They're already missing one of their dual mandates. And then unemployment, the jobs report came back bad. They are now 0 for 2 for the last report. So those are taking them different directions. Unemployment spikes when there's a bad economy. When there's a bad economy, they typically lower rates, but they also have high inflation in this case. So if they lower rates, inflation goes up. So either way that they go, they got all their options are bad decisions. Let's put it that way. And whichever decision they make, they're going to make one of those variables most likely worse. So the question that they have based on those two variables of inflation and employment is which one solves the other long term. I believe the answer is we are in a long-term inflation crisis. And if they beat inflation down and they get that under control, then they can solve the unemployment crisis long term. Short term pain on unemployment, I think that will spike if they don't figure out inflation. But if they don't solve inflation, this whole party is having a big problem. So that's kind of is that drill down in to a
Yeah,
more
it gives us something to
palatable?
focus on, right? To understand, unemployment and inflation, those are the two figures to really understand. Because to your point, like for a lot of people, you read the reports and, half of it is like the takeaway, right? Because you and another economist can read the same report and come back with two completely different takeaways. And I think that's always the challenge for those folks who maybe aren't as armed or as knowledgeable on that subject, because we're looking for that takeaway, right? Ultimately, as investors, it's a what does this mean for me? Like, can I expect lower rates? Should I be more aggressive and try to do more deals? Should I wait? Like that's what people are trying to get to. And sometimes it gets really challenging when you don't know what to look at. What I heard you say though was, and this is true for every economist, you have to understand that, the Fed has their mandates and we don't know what they're going to do. We know the directives that they have and what their goals are. And in this instance, those goals are almost conflicting. So it makes it even more tricky to figure out what they're going to do. But ultimately, you have to understand these things or at least have a sense of how it impacts your investing decisions. And we could obviously spend a lot of time,
Sure.
talking about these things. But, I think the key is just to start wrapping yourself into this information, start learning more about it so you can make your own decisions. Again, I know you've got some of these outlooks and reports available on your website. So I want to direct people to
Sure.
go to your website, check it out. Go to saneinvestment.com/resources, and you can learn a little bit more there. Right now, Nick, we're going to go to our round of insights. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmoncapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as
all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmoncapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Nic, give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
I would say, first off, the list is too long to name. Each one, the goal, the goal is, the number one goal is that you fix it once. Because if you can fix a failure once, then what actually ends up happening on the back end is you don't make the same failure again and you're that much stronger, period. So I would say the biggest early mistake that we made for Saints growth was over-reliance on a small number of investors. And what that did, we were working with some institutions and some key partners. And we found that avoiding the capital raising piece and not going out to market like this and working with retail investors and, being as collaborative with the retail side, with the investors that are looking for investment, we found that it hindered the amount of deals that we could have done and helped the amount of people that we could have helped. So I would think bigger. And I'd go bigger and I'd plan on bigger and systemize bigger earlier. That would be the biggest mistake, really with, multiple phases of the business.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for our listeners.
This is good. Flipbook. Not affiliated. It's an app on my phone that lets me get through tons of data very quickly, tons of articles very quickly. Mine's extremely tailored to investing and economics. So I can flip through and get the headlines for the day from the sources that are tailor-made to what I'm looking for. It's just a really good market circle up, and you could dive deep onto any article. You could see where certain things are at, but you can do it all very quickly. So I'm really liking that right now.
Love it. Flipbook it is. Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
The all-time book that I've recommended the most would probably be it's by Ryan Holiday. The Obstacle is the Way. That book finds its way to me. I read quite a bit. It's very important to me. That book finds its way to me at the most difficult times of my life or most difficult stages. And it reframes everything that I'm thinking in a way that makes it clear that this is not a bad part of the process. This is the process. And if you want the big things, this is how it works. There's pain, there's, some sleepless nights, there's stress, but who said it was supposed to be any other way, right? And so that book has a good mix of modern theory and classic stoicism that Ryan Holiday, I don't even like all his books, but that book is powerful. And that's one that I find my way to. And then I balance that with the classics. You're talking stoicism, you're talking, the Bible. I mean, there's tons of wisdom sitting there that's, thousands of years old, things that are classic, timeless, The Art of War. I try to balance new thinking, new ways of presenting that with the ultra classics that really don't ever go out of fashion and don't ever lose wisdom.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
I plan out 90-day periods of focus and weekly goals. So I have a whole chart that's maybe a little OCD, maybe a little, insane, but I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing every week. I get a scorecard for myself every week, and it's just ultra drilled down where in a 90-day period, I know I'm going to hit a certain goal.
I love it. All right. We talked a little about note investing earlier and buying mortgages. Give me your number one insight for mortgage investing.
Think long-term. If there's anything I learned from family offices, it's that sure, you can make a pop on a deal and get a big check today, or you can get a medium check for decades. And those stack on top of each other. And if you think, this is all of real estate, this isn't just mortgages. If you think long-term, it's the difference between maybe get rich quick or very likely get very wealthy over a longer period of time. I choose length. I choose that long-term approach because I was taught that from the beginning. And it's something that I'm really, really thankful for from my mentors.
Nic, let's go in a different direction. You're out there in Orange County. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Oh my gosh, that's A great question. Man, I'm simple. I'm simple. To be completely honest, we have a ton of amazing restaurants. John, Chipotle is still my go-to. I don't know, man. I can't apologize for that enough. But it's quick. It meets, I'm in the gym a lot. I try to power lift. That's kind of one of the few hobbies that I do get to have with a busy schedule. And it hits the requirements that I need. So, man, I find myself in Chipotle way too much, even to this day. And I don't apologize for it. I love it.
Chipotle it is, man. Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. Nic, you gave us a lot of great stuff, man. Loved our conversation. Felt like we could go on for another hour or so if we wanted to. But a couple takeaways for me. One, just learning early on, being around those family offices, focusing on generational wealth, understanding how those investors were putting their money into play really gave you the foundation for acquisitions and strategies and how to invest yourself. Making that transition to focus more on fixed income assets, right? Getting into mortgages and trying to understand how to create that void that many people were looking for. That was really big for your development and your growth. And then also just talking about, why you like industrial, what some of the things are that you're investing in today, and then talk about the economy, understanding the economics of it, focusing on the Fed, first and foremost, recognizing that unemployment and also, inflation are the two things that are really the focus of the Fed. And as investors, even if you're not that savvy when it comes to studying economics, those are the two things you definitely want to pay attention to whenever you're reading those headlines. Again, I know you have a lot of different data and a lot of resources available. I will tell our listeners again, go check out your website, saneinvestments.com/resources. Check out some of those freebies that are available there. And I just want to thank you again for coming on the show today, Nic, being a great guest. And we look forward to staying in touch with you.
John, I had a great time today. Always good to catch up with you and look forward to talking again in the future.